The road had been long and quietly shimmering when he first saw the village. It appeared between two gentle bends in the hills, its roofs folded like sleeping wings, its windows holding the last pale colors of evening. He felt no surprise, only a soft relief, as if this place had always been waiting at the edge of his tired thoughts. People moved slowly along the single street, lanterns in their hands, eyes mild and reflective. When he greeted them, every answer came in the same kindly phrase, spoken in the same even tone. "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." The words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, familiar though he was sure he had never heard them before. He walked deeper between the houses, noticing how each doorway framed the same drifting fragrance of tea, smoke, and quiet rain, though the night was dry. The air carried no engines, no distant traffic, only an easy hush that seemed to listen with him. When he asked where he might stay, every villager smiled with identical tenderness and replied, "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." One of them guided him to a small room above a lamplit porch, where the sheets were cool and the wooden walls held the faint glow of unseen stars. There was no key, no price mentioned, only trust laid out as simply as folded linen. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. In the quiet room, he sat at the window and watched lanterns drift along the street like patient comets. Whenever two villagers met, he saw their lips shape the same phrase, gentle and measured, as though the whole village breathed in one slow rhythm. He tried different questions: the name of the place, how many people lived here, how far it was to the next town. Smiles, nods, that same soothing answer. The repetition should have unsettled him, yet it did not. The harmony of it softened the edges of his thoughts, inviting him to surrender his questions and let the night smooth everything down to calm, light, and shadow. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He lay down without meaning to sleep, simply to rest his spine against the mattress that held him like gentle water. Through the open window came the faint murmur of identical voices, the phrase repeating now and then, like a lullaby carried on a slow breeze. "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." The words did not echo inside his skull. They settled lower in his chest, where worry usually lived. He listened until the syllables became only sound, and the sound became only warmth, and the warmth unfolded into dreamless, weightless dark in which he floated, unbothered by clocks or obligations or the distance from anywhere familiar. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Just before dawn, he woke to a pale glow unfurling beyond the hills, though the sun had not yet reached the valley. The village roofs shimmered with a faint, pearly sheen, as if lit from underneath by quiet oceans. Down on the street, villagers moved already, their lanterns no longer needed, but still lit, flames reduced to soft embers. When he stepped outside, they greeted him with the same unanimity, the same phrase, and yet each voice carried a slightly different note, like instruments tuned to one benevolent chord. He felt as if he had slept a week instead of a night, his thoughts smooth and strangely weightless. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Over breakfast, warm bread, fruit, and a fragrant drink he could not name, he tried again to draw out conversation. He spoke of trains, roads, maps. He mentioned cities and borders. Their eyes shone with patient interest, but their mouths only shaped, "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." Yet there was meaning inside the repetition. He sensed it like a pattern behind glass, an invitation to notice something other than words. The stillness around them was not empty. It thrummed with a quiet, unseen companionship, as though a larger presence listened with them, pleased by his calm, content to answer through comfort rather than explanations. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He wandered the outskirts after the meal, following a narrow path that curved past gardens rich with tall, silver-leafed plants that responded to his steps with the gentlest shiver. No insects hummed, no dogs barked, yet the silence did not feel lacking. Above the hills, the sky deepened into a blue so soft it seemed made for resting eyes. At the far edge of the village, he found a stone marker, smoothed by time, carved with symbols that were neither letters nor numbers, yet suggested directions. When he traced them with his fingers, a light warmth spread through his hands. Behind him, a calm voice repeated the phrase, "kind as ever." The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Evening came more quickly than he expected, sliding over the hills like silk. Lanterns kindled themselves before anyone touched them, each flame rising at the same unhurried moment, soft gold in the cooling air. He stood in the center of the street as villagers drifted out of doorways, their steps so synchronized it seemed choreographed, yet entirely natural. They gathered without crowding him, every face peaceful, every gaze steady. Together, as if guided by one slow breath, they spoke the phrase once more. In their eyes, he glimpsed reflections that were not of lanterns or roofs, but of something vast and gentle leaning close to listen. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. That night, instead of dreamless dark, his sleep filled with a shore of quiet lights. They rose from the village like seeds and unfolded into shapes both unfamiliar and comforting. Arcs, circles, drifting veils that pulsed with color softer than moonlight. None of it frightened him. The shapes approached, bringing with them a sense of being profoundly recognized, as though every tired moment of his life had been seen and accepted. They did not speak, yet he heard the phrase again inside his chest, expanded. "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind. We keep watch." He woke with tears, without sadness, only release. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. In the morning, he tried, gently, to tell a villager about the lights. The reply was the familiar phrase, but now he noticed the pause before it, the way the villager's gaze lifted briefly to the bright, clear sky, as if acknowledging unseen companions. Slowly he understood. The repeated words were not an absence of language, but all the language that was needed here. Every nuance poured into tone, into patient eyes, into the careful way hands offered bread, water, and unbroken attention. The village seemed to hum with concord, as though something above and within it approved of this simplicity and shared it with him. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. On the third day, a thought that arrived without proof, for clocks seemed unimportant. He noticed symbols etched above each doorway. They matched the stone marker at the edge of the village, curving into constellations he did not recognize. Yet they felt familiar to his gaze. When his fingers hovered near one carving, warmth answered again, like a pulse greeting a pulse. A villager beside him inclined their head and spoke the known phrase, but with a softness suggesting gratitude. The roofs, the stones, even the air shared a single quiet intention: to offer shelter without demand, to hold him like a gently cupped hand until his restless edges disappeared. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He began to understand that questions of names and borders did not belong here. Instead, he let his senses learn the village. The way lamplight never stung his eyes. The way the wells reflected constellations even during the day. The way every footstep sounded as though cushioned by distant surf. When he listened closely, beyond the silence, he heard a layered hum, as if innumerable soft minds were conversing just beyond his hearing. The villagers, serene and unhurried, went about their simple tasks. Any time his attention snagged on confusion, someone would be near, offering the same phrase that smoothed his thoughts like careful hands smoothing folded cloth. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. One evening, sitting at the well, he watched reflections drift across the water's surface. Rooftops, lanterns, and then something else. A ring of pale lights circling far above, slow as a protective orbit. When he blinked, the image remained, undeniably present, yet impossibly gentle. The sight should have startled him, but the village's calm had become his own. He felt that whoever watched from that ring understood the weight he had carried here, the quiet exhaustion he rarely admitted. "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind," someone murmured behind him, and he realized the words came not only from mouths, but also from that tender circumference overhead. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. The path up the hill called to him, and he followed without hurry. Grass brushed his ankles like cool water, and the air thinned into a clarity that made each breath a slow blessing. At the crest, he looked back. The village lay cradled in the valley, lamps like little moons, houses folded inward as if listening. Above it, that same circlet of soft lights traced a halo. He understood then that this place was watched over, not in secrecy, but in affection. Whatever intelligence coiled in that halo loved stillness, kindness, repetition, and had chosen this valley as a doorway where weary travelers could drift safely. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. When he descended, the villagers were gathered in the square. They did not beckon. They simply made room for him, a space shaped perfectly to his presence. Together, they lifted their faces toward the dimming sky. As one, they spoke the phrase. This time, he joined them, the words leaving his lips with surprising ease. The sound rose gentle and steady, and from above, the halo of lights answered with a slow brightening, like eyes opening in approval. In that moment, he felt no separation between hill, stone, sky, villagers, and the unseen companions beyond. Everything breathed one thought: you may rest. Nothing more is required of you. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. The following day, he noticed subtle differences. The villagers' matching phrase now carried faint variations, like accents of emotion. One voice sounded like morning sunlight on glass. Another, like rain beginning in the distance. Another, like embers sighing. Yet the words remained the same. He understood this as a kind of gentle agreement. Individuality resting comfortably within harmony. He sat with them beneath a tree of silver leaves that chimed without wind. They offered him fruit that melted away before it reached his stomach, leaving only a sense of nourishment. He wondered if he should be alarmed. Instead, he felt lighter, as if the village were trimming away his burdens. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He tried to recall how he had found the road that led here, but the memory blurred at its edges. He remembered fatigue, a sense of being stretched thin, the decision to take a quieter route. Details dissolved, leaving only the moment the village appeared, perfectly clear. The absence of before did not trouble him. It was as if the journey had been a long exhale, and this valley the pause at the end. Sitting on the porch of his borrowed room, he watched the hills hold the approaching dusk like arms. The same phrase flowed softly from passing lips, now a tide that gently rearranged his thoughts into calm shapes. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. At what he guessed was midnight, he woke, sensing a presence beyond the window. Not a figure, not an intruder, but a concentration of attention, focused yet kind. Outside, the street was empty, though lanterns glowed with steady patience. The sky above, however, carried new patterns. Elongated clouds edged with pale luminescence, moving contrary to any usual wind. He stepped to the sill, rested his hands on the frame, and simply breathed. In response, one of the lights brightened and descended slightly, like a greeting bow. No words formed, yet within, the now familiar phrase rose, woven with gratitude. Then, the sky smoothed itself back into stars. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Gradually, he understood. Whoever watched from above did not intend spectacle or fear. Their presence was like a hand against a fevered forehead, checking, cooling, assuring. The villagers were part of this gesture, guardians who had offered their voices to carry one message, one soothing wave to any wanderer who stumbled into their fold. He wondered how many before him had found this valley, had rested and left renewed, carrying no proof. The idea comforted him. It meant kindness might be secretly threaded through the world, unseen on any chart, waiting for those who needed quiet more than answers. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. When he finally unfolded a worn map from his bag, he searched for landmarks, the curve of hills, the tucked-away valley, a river he now realized he had not heard since arriving. There was nothing. The page showed empty color where the village rested so vividly before him. He laid the map on the table, and a villager standing nearby glanced down with mild curiosity, then up with steady eyes. "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." The phrase in that moment felt like an explanation. Some refuges existed beyond ink and coordinates, answering to other measures. Exhaustion eased, breath slowed, the night made harmless. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He spent longer wandering, tracing the subtle geometry of streets that always led him back to the same square. It felt designed for someone easily lost in thought, guiding him without sharp turns. In one corner, he discovered a mural of pale pigments that shifted when he blinked. Hills drifting aside, a path appearing, a ring of lights descending. The image never quite settled, yet every version emanated peace. A villager stood beside him, following his gaze, and spoke the familiar phrase with extra slowness, as if underlining it. He realized it could mean many things at once: arrival, permission, reassurance that nothing here would chase him away. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He began to mirror their gentleness. His own voice, once hurried from long routines and endless obligations, softened as he repeated the phrase in greeting, "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind." It felt different each time. Sometimes a blessing he offered the village, sometimes one the village extended through him. Under the same phrase, his posture eased, his breaths lengthened, his thoughts stepped out of strict lines. Standing by the well at dusk, he sensed how easily he could remain here, uncounted by calendars, unknown to maps, held within a promise that asked nothing but his willingness to let go of strain. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Yet a gentle edge of curiosity persisted. One afternoon, he walked beyond the last house, following a narrow track that knitted itself between stones. The air grew cooler, textured with a faint melodic vibration, as if distant chimes rang under the earth. When he glanced back, the village watched without disapproval. A few villagers raised their hands in a slow, identical salute, their lips forming the phrase, turning it into a traveling charm. Ahead, the track ended at another smooth stone. On its surface, the carved shapes glowed faintly, aligning into an arc that looked like an opening, though it was only rock. He touched it and felt stars. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. That night, sleep brought clarity rather than confusion. In another shore of quiet light, he saw how travelers moved along tangled roads full of noise and neon, their eyes dim with wakefulness. At certain turns, a soft adjustment occurred, like a hand guiding a compass needle. Those who needed it found, just for a while, a valley out of sequence, watched over by patient minds not bound to earth. The villagers in his dream moved with the same kindness, their single phrase a bridge between worlds. When he woke, dew silvered the windowsill, tracing delicate patterns that resembled the carved constellations on stone. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He realized there had been no introductions, no exchange of histories. No one had asked his profession, his plans, his failures. The calm here was not built on curiosity about his past, but on a complete, accepting disregard for it. As he sat beneath the silver-leafed tree, listening to the faint chiming of leaves, he understood how heavy his story had grown elsewhere. Here, it quietly loosened, thread by thread. A villager approached, placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, not possessive, only confirming his existence, and offered the phrase again. It felt now like, "You may be without your story for a while. It is safe to do so." The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Evenings deepened into a kind of ceremony. Villagers placed their lanterns along the main path, each light equidistant, forming a luminous river through the dark. He walked among them slowly. Overhead, the unseen watchers responded, their ring brightening in gentle pulses that never hurt his eyes. The unified phrase rose from many throats, merging with the distant hum, until there was no clear dividing line between human and other. He sensed messages passing above him, not in words, but in feelings, satisfaction, patience, an endless willingness to wait for tired travelers. Wrapped in that assurance, he felt his restfulness deepen into something quietly transformed. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. At times, he wondered whether the village itself might only be an echo of those lights, an arrangement of walls and faces shaped to comfort minds like his. The thought did not disturb him. If kindness required such an echo, it was a beautiful choice. He studied the houses, simple, clean, each with a small corner of cushions or blankets visible through open doors. Every detail seemed selected to cause no harm, no sharpness, no demand. Sitting on the steps of one such house, he let the idea settle. He was being hosted by an intelligence that understood human weariness intimately and responded with gently repeating hospitality. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. One morning, a low mist drifted through the narrow streets, cool against his hands. The villagers moved as always, unhurried, lanterns glimmering through the pale veil. As he passed, each offered the phrase, and the mist itself seemed to carry it, gathering it into beads of light. At the center of the square, he noticed a new stone, not there before, its surface blank and waiting. When he rested his palm upon it, warmth spread outward, and faint lines appeared. A curve resembling the road he had walked, a small mark for the village. It faded quickly, as if reminding him that maps here were gentle, temporary suggestions. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He realized, eventually, that his sense of time had loosened completely. He could not say if he had stayed 3 days or 30. His body felt neither hungry nor weak. Whenever he thought of food or drink, someone would appear with exactly what comfort invited: warm broth, cool fruit, bread that tasted of childhood evenings. No one measured portions, nothing was withheld. The phrase accompanied every offering, a refrain that quieted any remaining impulse to rush away. In rare moments of unease, he looked up, saw the soft halo pulsing above, and felt at once that his presence was known and cherished, not accidentally tolerated. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Still, one afternoon, an old habit stirred. He imagined emails, calls, the ticking of devices that no longer existed for him here. A sliver of obligation pressed against his calm. Sensing this, a villager guided him to the edge of the valley, where the road he had arrived on waited, subdued by distance. They stood silently. Then, with exceptional gentleness, the villager spoke the phrase, lingering on the word rest. It did not command him to stay or go. It simply reminded him of the choice before him. He understood. This village did not capture. It opened, received, and would one day let him walk away renewed. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. That night, the watchers showed him a clearer vision. In his drifting half-sleep, he saw the earth wrapped in countless faint glows, like distant villages hidden behind perception. Some belonged to forests, some to coastlines, some to nameless stretches of road. Each was a place where their kind had leaned close, crafting pockets of safety and gentleness. The village he rested in was one of many doors, a design perfected over long, patient study. They had learned that humans calmed when welcomed simply, when their questions were answered not with data, but with consistent warmth. Their chosen standard phrase had folded itself into his bones like a lullaby. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He woke with the sensation of having been carefully briefed, not by authority, but by caring hosts. There was no demand that he spread the knowledge, only a quiet permission. He walked through the village, perhaps for the last time, touching smooth door frames, pausing beside the well, listening to the silver leaves. The villagers greeted him steadily, Each repetition of the phrase sounded like both hello and farewell, identical yet rich. At the hill's crest, he looked back again. The valley shimmered softly, as if seen through gentle rain, though the air was dry. He understood that whenever someone left, the village folded itself lighter, waiting for another wanderer. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He delayed departure, not from fear of the outside, but from gratitude. Sitting on the stone where he had first traced the glowing carvings, he closed his eyes and allowed his thoughts to grow quiet. In that stillness, he felt the attention of the watchers focused entirely upon him, not probing, simply present. Their presence felt like immense, benevolent patience, curious about nothing except whether he felt rested enough. When he opened his eyes, a villager stood nearby, lantern in hand despite the daylight, and spoke the phrase once more. It was an invitation to decide, wrapped in kindness he knew would not withdraw regardless of his choice. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He considered what it would mean to tell someone about this place. The words he might use: strange, impossible, unbelievable, did not fit the tenderness of the valley. To fold this village into loud conversations or hurried schedules felt wrong. It was meant, he sensed, to be found quietly, without seeking, by those whose weariness had tuned them to its frequency. He imagined returning to maps, to straight-line distances and plotted destinations, carrying instead a memory of curved paths and folded spaces. If he spoke of anything, he thought, it would be of a feeling, of one simple phrase that had been enough to mend frayed edges. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. On what he knew had become his last evening there, the lanterns formed a new pattern. Instead of a straight river of lights, they gathered in a gentle circle around him in the square. Villagers stood at equal distances, each flame reflected in calm eyes. The sky's halo descended a fraction lower, its brightness still soft, like moonlight filtered through clouds. Together, they spoke the phrase for him alone, the sound slow and encompassing. He felt wrapped, recognized, carefully completed. In that held moment, every restless path in his mind laid itself down. He understood that leaving would not erase this peace. It had soaked too deeply. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. The next morning, the path out of the village was unmistakably clear, lined with fallen silver leaves that shone faintly under his steps. No one blocked his way. Instead, villagers waited along the route, not as guards, but as quiet witnesses. Each repeated the phrase as he passed, offering it like a small glowing stone he could tuck into his chest. At the last house, he hesitated, looking back over roofs and lanterns, over the square and the shimmering halo above. For a moment, he thought he heard additional words beneath the familiar cadence, promising that distance would not sever the connection. Then the breeze folded them away. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He stepped onto the open road, expecting a rush of grief or confusion. Instead, there was a spacious stillness inside him, as if he carried a small version of the valley in his breath. The landscape beyond seemed gentler than before, colors softer, noises muted. No signpost marked where he had come from. When he unfolded his map again beneath a roadside tree, the page still showed blankness where he knew the village lay. Yet now the emptiness looked deliberate, like a doorway having chosen invisibility. He smiled, hearing inwardly the phrase spoken one last time, steady and sure, guiding his steps without binding them. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Curiosity returned in slow, harmless waves. As he walked toward the next town, he watched for any indication that others might have known the place. A symbol scratched on a milestone, a rumor in a roadside cafe. People spoke only of usual routes and familiar hotels. No one mentioned a valley of repeating words. He listened without frustration. The secret did not feel like something stolen. It felt entrusted. At night, in an ordinary room, he lay down and whispered the phrase to himself. To his quiet amazement, the same ease flowed over him, as if somewhere above unfamiliar roofs, the watchers recognized his voice and answered in silence. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Days stretched on, full of normal tasks and casual conversations. Often he reached for his map and let his finger hover over the blank space that hid the village. He never tried to draw it in. Instead, he traced a small circle there, then closed the map, a private acknowledgement. Whenever fatigue pressed at the edges of his thoughts, he would pause, close his eyes, and hear again the identical voices, the gentle footsteps, the lanterns brightening as one. The memory behaved not like a dream that fades, but like a resting place stored inside him, patiently available the moment he consented to be quiet. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Sometimes, in crowded stations or bright, sleepless streets, he caught a fleeting echo of the phrase from passing strangers' mouths, though they were speaking other words entirely. It came through in intonation, in the kindness of an offered seat, in the patience of someone holding a door. In those moments, he wondered whether they too had found a place like his village, another haven folded away from measured space. The thought comforted him, a quiet network of unseen sanctuaries, their guardians human and other, all repeating in their own ways the same message. The world felt less harsh knowing such gentleness threaded invisibly through its noise. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. One evening, after a long journey, he returned to the region where the hills curved in a familiar way. He had not planned it. His route had simply bent, like a compass drawn back to a steady star. Standing at a crossroads, he recognized the outline of distant ridges and the hush that fell when the wind paused. His heart answered softly. He followed the quietest road, not out of desperation now, but gratitude, a wish to say thank you, even if only to empty air. The sky dimmed gently, as if approving. Somewhere above, he felt attention turn toward him, warm and unhurried. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. As he walked, the road remembered him. The bends unfolded in the same gentle sequence, the air growing quieter, sounds from distant farms fading into a soft, anticipatory hush. Yet, when he reached the place where the village had once appeared, the valley lay open and undecorated. No lanterns, no silver-leafed trees, only grass stroked by evening light. For a moment, his breath caught, not in panic, but in delicate longing. He stood very still, listening. The silence that met him was deep and kind, like a held note waiting for his understanding, not his disappointment. Overhead, the sky looked ordinary, though its blue felt unusually watchful. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He descended into the empty valley. The ground was undisturbed, as if no footsteps had ever worn paths there. Yet small traces tugged gently at his awareness, a patch of grass pressed smoother than the rest, a ring of stones that seemed arranged by considerate hands, a place where the air tasted faintly of the same fragrant drink he had once sipped. He walked slowly among these almost signs until his heartbeat matched the unhurried rhythm of the land. Then, from no clear direction, the phrase reached him, carried on a breeze. It was soft, thinner than before, but unmistakable, like a greeting sent through folded distance. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He closed his eyes and let the remembered cadence move through him. You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind. Speaking it aloud in the vacant valley, he felt no foolishness. The words settled into the ground, into the stones, into the fading warmth of daylight. Responses came not as voices, but as subtle changes, a deepening of scent, a tenderness in the air on his skin, a sense of being gently counted. The watchers, he realized, no longer needed the village's visible form to reach him. Once welcomed so completely, a traveler carried his doorway within, able to find rest even where nothing remarkable seemed to stand. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Twilight poured softly over the valley. He lay back on the grass, folding his hands behind his head, and watched the first stars appear. They blinked into being in slow coordination, forming for an instant the faint curve of the familiar halo before dissolving into a natural scatter. The gesture felt like a nod, a reminder. He understood. The village had not vanished. It had withdrawn, its structures folded impossibly thin, leaving only the essence of its promise. When a weary soul again wandered near, it would bloom once more, as real and tender as before. The thought soothed him until even his breathing felt weightless. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Night deepened, full of gentle sounds, the rustle of grass, a shy bird, his own quiet breaths. No lanterns lined the path, yet he did not feel abandoned. Instead, the sky itself seemed to lean closer. Without spectacle, certain stars brightened in a slow, reassuring pattern, tracing arcs that matched the carvings he remembered on stone. His body settled against the earth as if on a familiar mattress. The phrase echoed inside him, no longer needing external voices to be believed. Wrapped in ordinary starlight, woven with extraordinary attention, he drifted toward sleep, carried once again without falling, secure in unseen arms. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. In the space between waking and dreaming, he glimpsed the village in its folded state. Translucent houses like ideas, lanterns like intentions, villagers like outlines of kindness. Around and through them moved the watchers, luminous yet gentle, adjusting angles, smoothing edges, preparing the doorway for the next traveler whose life had frayed. They regarded him with calm affection, acknowledging his return, assuring him that his rest had mattered to them as much as theirs had mattered to him. No bargains, no commands, only a shared softness. He understood that gratitude flowed both ways across the thin line between worlds. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. When he woke at dawn, the valley looked utterly ordinary again. Yet he now recognized ordinary as one of their chosen disguises. Standing, he brushed dew from his clothes and felt entirely unhurried. The road waited, but did not tug. He whispered the phrase once more into the quiet air, a parting blessing to the invisible structure resting just beyond his senses. The response came as sunlight breaking gently over the hills, with a warmth that seemed to notice him in particular. Carrying that warmth, he began to walk, knowing that distance could not dim what he now held as naturally as his own pulse. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. In later years, whenever life pulled tight again, he would seek small, overlooked places. A curve of road behind warehouses, a stand of trees behind a station, a forgotten lane where air fell suddenly still. He listened there for the texture of that familiar welcome. Sometimes he sensed only his own echo. Other times, a subtle shift in light or temperature answered, wrapping his mind in the same unspoken promise. He realized the map of such refuges was scattered in feeling rather than ink. The village had been one waypoint, a clear, generous demonstration of what watched over countless quieter corners of the world. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He spoke of it only indirectly to others, offering the phrase, "on difficult days." "You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind," he would say to a friend who looked exhausted, or to a stranger overwhelmed in a waiting room. Most took it as a gentle oddity, a kind sentence from a soft-spoken traveler. A few, though, met his eyes with sudden recognition, as if recalling their own impossible valley, their own circle of lanterns. In those moments, nothing further was said. It did not need to be. The understanding passed between them like shared shelter, wordless and relieving. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Over time, his memories of ordinary places blurred, but the textures of the village remained sharp. The weight of the lantern's glow, the sound of leaves chiming without wind, the feeling of carved stone warming beneath his fingertips. These details returned most vividly when he grew tired, as if the watchers refreshed them intentionally, reminders of that first deep permission to stop striving. He no longer worried whether any of it would stand up to explanation. It did not need to. Its purpose was fulfilled each time he closed his eyes, breathed slowly, and felt the world become, once again, a little kinder and slower around him. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Eventually, he understood the gentlest secret of all. The village had never demanded belief in visitors' waking hours. Its only wish, if such immense patience could be called wishing, was that they carry forward the possibility of rest that asked nothing in return. Sitting by an open window in a distant city, he listened to rain and softly repeated the phrase. The room around him, though small and cluttered, felt for a moment like the same valley, the same square, the same attentive sky. The difference between there and here thinned, revealing how much of the doorway now lived entirely within his willingness to be quiet. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He grew older. Lines came to his face, like gentle etchings, not of strain, but of many evenings spent watching skies. Sometimes, half asleep, he felt the touch of that distant attention again, as if someone were quietly checking that he still knew how to rest. He did. When people around him spoke of burnout, of endless motion, he would share small rituals, slow walks at dusk, lights dimmed together, one kind sentence repeated until it softened the air. He never mentioned visitors from the sky, Yet their influence flowed through his habits, subtle and steady, an inheritance of peace offered without signatures. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. One night, while traveling alone through yet another unfamiliar landscape, he felt an old, gentle pull. The road curved in a way his body remembered before his mind did. Hills rose like familiar shoulders against the horizon. The sky's color deepened into that same restful hue he had once watched settle over a hidden valley. He stopped his movement and stepped out into the quiet. No signs, no lights, only the feeling of being carefully noticed. His heart lifted, not with urgency, but with the tranquil certainty of someone approaching an old, patient friend. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He followed the silence until the sense of alignment returned, each step loosening the small knots of travel. The valley received him once more, though still unseen. Grass whispered, air cooled, and overhead a few stars brightened in a delicate curve he recognized instantly. He did not demand the houses reappear, nor the villagers line the path. Simply standing there, he felt surrounded by the same layered presence. Human voices ready to be shaped if needed, watchful minds poised above, all willing to meet him halfway. He spoke the phrase again, this time as equal participant rather than only guest, and felt the reply bloom warmly through the air. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. In that soft exchange, he realized the encounter had changed him into something like a quiet beacon. Not a messenger with declarations, but a living reassurance that such places existed. The watchers, he sensed, trusted him now to recognize their touch in subtle corners of the world, and to respond only with welcome, never with fear. He closed his eyes and let a long breath out. Around him, the unseen village seemed to open in response. Paths suggested themselves. Windows glimmered at the edge of perception. Familiar lantern light brushed his eyelids. It was enough. He knew he could walk fully in again whenever necessary. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He stepped back from the brink of entering, choosing instead to carry the doorway with him a little longer. As he returned to the main road, the landscape around him seemed layered. The visible world of signs and schedules, and beneath it, the soft geometry of hidden villages, each ready to appear for the next tired traveler. The knowledge rested in him like a calm star. Whenever headlights or street lamps glared too harshly, he remembered lanterns that glowed in agreement. Whenever voices rose sharp, he recalled the safety of identical, gentle words. The contrast did not embitter him. It simply reminded him of what else was possible. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. Years folded over years. On a late journey, when his hair had gone pale as morning mist, he found himself once more on an unplanned detour. The map in his pocket felt almost ceremonial now. Ahead, two bends in the road cradled a space thick with familiar quiet. His pulse slowed happily. He knew that if he wished, the village would unfurl again. Roofs unfolding from shadow, lanterns kindling in unison, figures stepping from doorways with their calm, mirrored smiles. The invitation hovered in the air, patient as ever. He paused, listening to his own breathing, to the softness gathered just beyond visible form. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. He closed his eyes and, without speaking aloud, formed the phrase. It rose through him as naturally as breath. You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind. The valley listened. A quiet shift moved through the air, like curtains drawn back without sound. Behind his eyelids, he saw lanterns blooming awake, heard the measured shuffle of footsteps, felt the watchful minds bend closer in recognition. Age, distance, all the stories accumulated since his first arrival fell away for a moment. There was only that same circling promise, unchanged. He understood that the doorway had never been about youth or chance, only about readiness to soften. The quiet around him felt deep and tender, encouraging his thoughts to slow and soften. When he opened his eyes, the village was there again, exactly as before. Roofs folded like sleeping wings, windows holding the last pale colors of evening. Villagers moving slowly with lanterns in their hands. No surprise touched him now, only a gentle relief, as if this place had always been waiting at the edge of his tired thoughts. A traveler, him, and also simply someone weary, stepped forward along the single street. Voices rose in perfect unison, offering the only words this haven ever needed. You are welcome. Rest while the sky is kind. The road behind him quieted, and the circle of his journey closed without ever truly ending.